The U.S. would never.
Okay. Reason why I was showing that documentary that actually goes back to the year 2010, goes back about 11 years, is that during First World War, Turkey had a large population of Christian Armenians living in the area. Let me see. Let me back up here a second. Let me look for a map. Maybe this map right here. All right. No, this map is no good. It's too small, actually. I need a little bit larger map. Let me see. Let me see if I can get a decent map. But anyway, bottom line is that there was a very large, let me see, map of Turkey and surrounding countries. Okay. Let's see if we can get something here that I can kind of show you a little bit better. Maybe this one. But anyway, the Armenians were actually very successful people. They were, okay, so here is Turkey, and this is kind of hard to read. Okay, here you go. All right, so as you can see right here is Turkey, right? And here is Istanbul, which, as you recall, was Constantinople prior to the Ottoman Empire taking over, right? And also, as we've been talking, the Ottoman Empire, the who were Muslims and considered themselves to be the protectors of Islam, the protectors of the Muslim religion. They worked their way up this way, taking over land, and actually, I mean, making it all the way up to Hungary. They took over part of Romania. Places like Albania today are something like 95, 96% Muslim still. Serbia, Montenegro, all of that stuff. But right in here, right in the heart of Anatolia, which this, as you recall, this land right here anciently was called Anatolia. In fact, that word Anatolia goes back to Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar talked about Anatolia, talked about invading Anatolia and all that kind of stuff. But right here in the heart of Anatolia, mainly in what is, now considered what now is Ankara, which is the second largest in Turkey, and also in Istanbul as well. There were a lot of Armenians, and you can see Armenia right here. Here is Armenia, and they were considered to be highly successful business people, but they were Christians. And when First World War broke out, Turkey aligned itself with the Axis powers. They aligned themselves with Austria and with Germany, and they fought against the Allied powers, which were France, England, stuff like that. Eventually, the United States. And they put together, or at least experts. Now, again, they deny this. Turkey denies this adamantly. In fact, these are almost fighting words in as far as they're concerned, right? Fighting words. But the experts say that the Turkish government, the Ottoman, remember, they weren't called Turkey just yet. The Ottoman government put together a plan to exterminate not only the Armenians that lived in Anatolia, in Turkey, but even the Armenians that were in their own country. And they consequently, we don't know exactly how it happened, but as the beginning of that documentary was saying, there are areas over this way here. There are areas around Armenia, around Azerbaijan, parts of Iran, where you can literally go into the desert and dig, take a shovel and dig and find human bones. It is said they have been accused of conducting a campaign of genocide. The word genocide means massive killing of human beings. That's what the word genocide means. In other words, Hitler was guilty of conducting genocide against the Jews and against other minority people that he disliked. Gypsies, for instance. He didn't like gypsies. He thought gypsies were this and that and the other, and he tried to kill off as many gypsies as he possibly could. Recently, in the last couple of decades, in Africa, there has been genocide by the Tutsis against the Tutsis against the other group. I forgot the name of the other group, but anyway, there are two groups, and there was one dominant group, and they wanted to exterminate the other group in this one particular African country. So they have been accused of genocide, and they went out and they killed a whole bunch of them. So there are areas right adjacent to Turkey where you can actually go out into the desert and dig up bones. No one really knows how many people were killed during this process of genocide, but some people say about 1 million. About 1 million Armenians were exterminated. They were put into caves and poisoned. They were shot on their way out as they were being transported out, as they were being forced out of the lands that they had been living in. Bottom line, 1 million people died. And why am I showing you this? Because yesterday, the United States government, let me give you a little background, and that's what that documentary is all about. The United States government had been arguing back and forth. People would go to the Senate, people would go to the Congress, the President of the United States, and everybody would be arguing as to whether this particular action that the Ottomans took, whether it should be called genocide or not. Whether it should be called genocide or not. If it's called genocide by the United States, and for some reason they managed to bring, the United States manages to bring this notion to the United Nations, and the United Nations votes on it, and they vote that it was indeed genocide. I don't know what will happen at that point. I mean, it's very possible that countries that have veto power in the UN would veto that particular resolution. And these countries are China, Russia. Right? China and Russia are the two that have got veto power, and they often use it to push back on anything that the West, European countries and the United States and Canada and Australia, New Zealand, whatever it is that they want to do, those two countries usually push back, and they take the opposite side and they veto whatever resolution there is. But yesterday, Joe Biden, the president of the United States, finally decided, after about 11 or 12 years of the United States arguing internally, right? Arguing between Democrats and Republicans and between this guy and that guy, and saying, is it genocide? Is it not genocide? Should we call it genocide? Should it be official? Should it not be official? All of a sudden, yesterday, he announced that he was calling it genocide. Man, oh man, Erdogan, who is the president of Turkey, went ballistic, went totally nuts. Totally nuts. Now, keep in mind that Turkey, part of Turkey sits in Europe, in the European continent, and part of Turkey, the other part of Turkey, the majority of Turkey sits in Asia, right? Sits in Asia. So once you cross over, I'm sorry for that screen moving like that, but once you go eastbound out of Istanbul, there's a division there, and that land mass that is east of Istanbul is Asia. The landmass west of Istanbul is Europe, right? And because of this, Turkey is a member of NATO, the North Atlantic Trade Treaty Agreement, right? The North Atlantic Treaty Agreement or Association or whatever you call it. NATO, remember that, NATO. And NATO is a military alliance. It's a military alliance. It is a military alliance composed of European countries, the United States, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. All of those countries come together and they pitch in money to maintaining an army, navy, and air force. And this was done back when the Soviet Union, Russia, we were in the midst of this Cold War with Russia. Russia had a lot of countries under its control. And there was always fear that Russia would try to invade Western Europe, the Europe that lies on the other side of Poland, right over here, right this line that runs here, Poland, like that, Slovakia, Hungary, all the way down. The part of Europe that was west of that, the European countries were fearful that Russia one day would try to invade. And they created NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Agreement, or treaty organization. And it's strictly a military organization, different from the EU, the European Union, which is a political and economic organization which tries to do things from an economic perspective. In other words, uh, a common currency like the euro rather than the dollar or something like that. Now, Turkey has tried to join the EU many times, but it has always been turned down. And it has always been turned down because the name EU references European. And the argument is always that no, wait a minute, Turkey only has a little sliver of European land. 97, 98% of Turkey lies in Asia. And not only that, Turkey is mostly Muslim, is Islamic. Europe, for the most part, 97, 98% of Europe is Christian. So the cultural differences are too much, and they've always been turned down. However, from the perspective of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty, right? Organization, which is a military organization, Turkey was allowed to join. So now here is a country that is an ally of the rest of Europe. It's an ally, supposed to be an ally of the rest of Europe. It's an ally of the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. And they have always claimed that they did not commit genocide with the Armenians. Now, all of a sudden, the United States, who carries a lot of power inside of NATO and inside of the EU, has said, no, wait a minute, we have investigated this, and everybody agrees that yes, you did, you committed genocide, you purposely killed a million people, maybe more. And Erdogan, the president of Turkey, as I say, he's gone ballistic. He went totally nuts, and he's thinking of kicking out the ambassador of the United States. He's saying that he is going to leave NATO and he is going to join Russia in an alliance with Russia. And I mean, he's just going totally ape. He's going totally ape. So that's why I wanted to begin to show you a little bit of that documentary, which happened. That documentary was filmed in 2010, 60 minutes, right? Because back in 2010, the conversation, the dialogue as to whether Turkey had committed a genocide or not, had been going on, and it was heating up. It was beginning to heat up in 2010. And let me give you some ideas. Cher, the singer, Cher, who is very, very popular. She's a singer and she's an actress. She is half Armenian. She's half Armenian. I think her mother is something, I don't know what, Italian, or her father was Armenian. So she considers herself Armenian. And she has been pushing the government of the United States to finally come out and say that this was genocide, done against her people. When Joe Biden came out yesterday and said it is genocide, she immediately, she started sending messages on Twitter and on Facebook saying, we're finally calling it for what it is, and all this kind of stuff. And this is becoming, a fairly big hullabaloo, and you need to be aware of this. You need to be aware of it, especially considering that, we're talking about the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire, as I've been telling you from the beginning, they've considered themselves to be the protectors of Islam, in spite of the fact that they allowed Christians to live inside of the Ottoman Empire. They were never really treated equally. to the rest of the Muslims. And they invaded countries outside of their purview, of their area. You know, they went this way, they went up, you know, into Western Europe, into Europe, in order to convert people, and convert people by the sword. Now, not to say that the Christians have never done that. You know, they have too. You know, the Christians, and when we have the class on Charlemagne and the Holy Roman Empire and all that stuff, we're going to learn, you know, about the Knights Templars, who was nothing more than a militia, you know, mercenary group put together by the Christian countries to go out and do the same thing, basically, you know. So this, you know, this whole notion of the cultural, religious differences between right here in this, right smack where in the middle of where Asia and Europe divides, has always been big. It's always been a flashpoint. It's always been a place where, you know, the cultures clash, you know, where the cultures clash. So anyway, so let me again reiterate that if any of you have any questions, you can write them down if you wish. That's not a problem. You can blur them out if you wish. That's also not a problem. You can say something. I'll hear you. You can raise your hand. But it is always good when you comment or ask questions, because for me as a teacher, I am able to gauge your understanding of what I'm presenting to you. And at least it allows me to know which direction to take, what areas to speak about a little bit more, what areas to kind of, you know, not concentrate my efforts so much. So it's always good when you do that. Okay, so anyway, so like I told you from the beginning, as in the case of Rome, of the Roman Empire, this is big history, right? The Ottoman Empire, from a time perspective, is not as big as Rome. Rome goes on for more than 1,000 years, way more than 1,000 years. They go back to before Christ, they even after Christ, all the way up to the 1400s. So, you know, more than, you know, almost a couple of thousand years. And a lot happened in Rome. Rome was a very dynamic environment, right? Because of the fact that they had a Senate that in many ways was as powerful or more powerful than the leaders, you know, whether be it an emperor or a king or a council, you know, they used to call them councils. They were the more powerful ones. Consequently, councils changed often. So if you recall, I gave you a list of all the guys, all the people that you needed to kind of understand who they were. And it's an extensive list. It's an extensive list because there were times that some of these councils were only allowed to govern for short periods of time, and then they would get changed. So when that happens, you get a lot of different people that are coming in, and you get a lot of different history that's being created, right? If you move from Caesar to Augustus, well, Caesar did things in a certain way. Augustus did things a little bit differently, you know. And if you move through the ranks, and then all of a sudden you have someone like Commodus, Commodus was a nut. Nero was a nut. So, you know, you'd have maybe a good guy followed by a good guy, followed by an idiot, right? By a total idiot, followed by a good guy, followed by an idiot. So the history of Rome is much more dynamic than the history of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire, the caliphs, for the most part, would stay in for the duration. Nobody, unless somebody came in and kicked them out by force, they would be there until the day they died. And then another caliph would rise to power. So consequently, they weren't, it was a shorter period of time because it went on, you know, from like the 1400s until 1920, right? Which it's only a span of, I don't know, maybe 600 years or so, 600, 700 years versus, you know, a couple of thousand years for Rome. But also these guys, once they went in there, they stayed. So what I try to do with you so that you don't really, I don't overwhelm you with information, is to give you an idea of what the Ottoman Empire was, what it represented, the cultural components, the religious components of the Ottoman Empire. And as far as the leaders, there are very few that you should remember, very few that you should really remember, because a lot of the interim leaders, a lot of the in-between leaders during the time that the Ottoman Empire was there, they did good things or bad things, or they did things that were important, but there were a few leaders who really did a lot. And those are the ones that you need to remember. You need to understand them when you're on your own. If you want to know more about this, you can research them. Certainly, this PowerPoint is for you as you get it, you know, from the cloud class people. It's your possession. It belongs to you. You should go in there and use it whenever you're writing reports, whenever you're trying to read up on things. It's yours. It's kind of like your textbook. I can't give you a textbook. So the next best thing is for me to put together a PowerPoint that is detailed enough for you to understand. So anyway, so we kind of left it here. You know, we're talking about the areas that that they had taken over. You know, the Ottomans had taken over. How they had gone from being a bunch of tribesmen in Anatolia to getting the zeal, the religious zeal in them, to move them to conquer, right? And how they conquered, you know, the large area that they ended up conquering. Of course, when Germany, Austria, and them lost the First World War, this empire came tumbling down. Came tumbling down. The Allies, led by England mostly, carved up this area into countries and put heads of government in each country. You know, countries like, let's say, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, you know, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia. these were all creations of England. These were all creations of England. In other words, once England came in, once the the Allies came in and they won, and the Ottoman Empire broke down, and these countries went back to being independent and not dependent on the Ottoman Empire. England created uh, different committees and different ways of studying and saying, okay, fine, we need to create a country here. Some of those, some people say that this was done wrongly, that they shouldn't have done that. Uh, that, for instance, Kuwait and Iraq should have really been one country. Maybe Kuwait, Iraq, and Qatar should have been one country. But what England wanted to do was to make sure not one particular country could rise to the power, to the prominence that the Ottoman Empire had. So by separating them and keeping them separate, England was kind of hoping to keep peace in this large area, you know, an area where the flashpoint of the culture and the religion coming together and clashing, you know, had always been a problem. Had always been a problem. So anyway, so this is one guy that you should remember. Um, and if you get a chance, um, I would say study this guy if you possibly can. Um, and let me read here. The Committee of Union and Progress, CUP, would establish the second constitutional era in the Young Turk Revolution in 1908. What had happened was that after 600 years of caliphs holding on to the seat of power and really not allowing for progress to happen, right? And that's what happens whenever an organization that has got religious leanings, whenever they get a lot of power, you know, they just don't want change. And that's why they're usually called conservatives. Conservative because they want to keep things the same forever, right? So anyway, second constitution era in the Young Turk Revolution in 1908, turning the empire into a constitutional monarchy, which conducted competitive multi-party elections. Now, a constitutional monarchy is, okay, it's kind of like it is in England right now, and it is in Spain and in the European countries that have got a king. They have a monarchy, they have a king, a queen, princes, princesses, dukes, you know, all of this nonsense. And they sort of represent the higher echelon of government, but they have no power. They just sit there kind of like as for tourists to come and see, really, you know, because they have no power. Look at the Queen of England. She has no power. She, when something happens and the parliament decides something, they ask her, can you please come and approve what we did? And she has no power to say, no, you can't do that. She always approves because it is in the Constitution. So they have a king and a queen and all that stuff and a palace, and they sit there with their crowns and their jewels and all that kind of stuff. But the people that run the business of government is the government. And they run it through a constitution. They have a constitution. And I don't know whether somebody asked last time about when oh, it wasn't you guys. It was the other class on the 12 Angry Men. Yeah. Anyway, the Constitution goes back to the Magna Carta back in the 1200. That's when the Constitution began to shape itself over the years, and it took hundreds of years in England. Let me see. Somebody here is making a comment. She's just the face of the country. All the power is in the hands of the government. Yes, indeed. That's right. That's right, Eric. She's only the face of the country. And that's a very good way of putting it. She's just the face. She is the one that meets with, with the president of the United States or whatever, and, invites people to dinner and blah, blah, blah. But the reality is that the prime minister and all of the other PMs, they're the ones that are really running the business. But anyway, the Constitution goes way, way, way back, goes back to the Magna Carta when people were saying we need rights, it's nice to have a king, but the king really, we need to have some checks and balances on the king. And the Magna Carta came in and it started to take form, every year people will add to it, do this, do that, do the other. They'd call it a constitution, they'd call it this, they'd call it that. And eventually there was a war fought in England, a civil war between the Republicans and the monarchy and the people that wanted a monarchy. The Republicans won for a little bit, and then the monarchies came back. But the bottom line is that at that point, the monarchy realized that they needed to have a constitutional monarchy. And this is what we're seeing here in this situation, which conducted competitive multi-party elections. A few years later, the now radicalized and nationalistic Union and Progress Party would take over the government in the 1913 coup d'etat, creating a one-party regime. The CUP, the CUP, allied the empire with Germany, hoping to escape from the diplomatic isolation which had contributed to its recent territorial losses, and thus joined World War I on the side of the Central Powers. They joined on the side of Germany, Austria, that type of stuff. While the empire was able to largely hold its own during the conflict, it was struggling with internal dissent, especially with the Arab Revolt in its Arabian holdings. Places like Saudi Arabia, places like Qatar, Kuwait, Iraq, Egypt, crossing over the Stretch of Hormuz, over into Egypt, all the way across from Egypt, into Morocco and things like that. Some of these countries, they didn't really like this. They were Arabic-speaking countries. Turks don't speak Arabic. They speak Turkish. And again, like I've told you many, many times, whenever you have a culture that doesn't speak the language, that has different values, and they come over and they take over you, there's going to be problems. There's always going to be problems. Let me see what other. Well, the empire was able to largely hold its own on Arabian holdings. All right. During this time, genocide was committed with the Ottoman government against the Armenians, Assyrians, and Greeks. The empire's defeat and the occupation of part of its territory by the Allied powers in the aftermath of World War I resulted in its partitioning and the loss of its Middle Eastern territories, which were divided between the United Kingdom and France. And this is what I told you. Actually, I said the United Kingdom, I said England. I guess France had a little bit to do in it. They came in and they said, we gotta chop this up. The Ottomans, they're a problem. These guys are a problem. They need to democratize themselves. They need to have a system that they can't be considering themselves to be the protectors of Islam, because whenever you give yourself that title, the protectors of Christianity, the protectors of Islam, you're going to commit crimes. You know, you are going to try to convert people by the sword. You're going, you know, there's going to be problems. There's going to be problems. The successful Turkish War of Independence led to Mustafa Kemal Ataturk against the occupying allies, led to the emergence of the Republic of Turkey in the Anatolian heartland and the abolition of the Ottoman monarchy. This is when things went kaput. They went poof, and everything just disintegrated. Now, this guy over here, Ataturk, when he reorganized the government, he wanted, oh, let me make this bigger here. He wanted to create an empire, or rather a country, that was not driven by religion alone, right? That was not driven by religion alone. So what I did there, and let me look at the time that we have, because as I say, I want to give you the highlights. I don't want to go into a lot of the detail that later it's going to go in one ear and out the other, and then you're going to forget. I just want to give you the big picture. That kind of brought, excuse me, that kind of brought you very quickly from Constantinople, the Byzantine Empire being overrun by the Ottomans, the Ottomans taking over, moving westerly into Europe, moving easterly and southerly into the Arabian Peninsula, moving again westbound over the top of Africa and going as far as Morocco, right to the tip, you know, of Africa on the left-hand side. So it brought you up to that point. But now let's look at some of the detail. But remember, let's not go crazy on the detail. Let's touch on a few things so that you understand what this whole hullabaloo is all about. So let's talk about that. Again, any questions, any comments, go for it. So let's talk about the rise of the Ottoman Empire. And it really started with and this over here is a depiction of the Battle of Nicopolis in 1396. And this is a painting from 1523. And it's one of these crazy paintings, which I love these paintings. There's a guy that used to make paintings about New York, kind of in the same way. You know, it was kind of as if somebody could go on a balloon, you know, on a hot air balloon and climb just above New York and see the whole picture rather than seeing the little details. So you see how, you know, the Turks were here and they were shooting over this river and, you know, this type of stuff. These paintings are always very interesting. So the rise, circa 1299 to 1453. As the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum declined in the 13th century, Anatolia was divided into a patchwork of independent Turkish principalities known as the Anatolia Beyliks, right? So when you look, and again, let me back it up. Remember Anatolia, right? Anatolia right here. So basically, Anatolia, prior to this period and around this period, was made up of tribes. One tribe here, one tribe here, one tribe there, and they all had their own little leaders, so to speak, right? They all had their own little leaders, so to speak. One of these beyliks in the region of Bithynia. Now, let's see if we can spot Bithynia. It's always good to kind of see where, I don't know, that Bithynia. And to be honest with you, I don't know exactly where Bithynia is. Could be anywhere inside of this area right here. Could be anywhere. Well, it'd be nice if we could see where Bithynia was. Um, to me, the word Bithynia is only a word. I can't put it. And I like seeing it in a map because that allows me to visualize, you know, what is really going on. One of the battles in the region of Bithynia on the frontier. Okay, on the frontier of the Byzantine Empire. So that would be very close to Constantinople, to what it is today, Istanbul. Was led by the Turkish tribal leader Osman. And remember, I told you that the word Osman evolved over the years to become Ottoman, because of the language. The Turkish language is such that sometimes Os sounds like Ot, right? So a figure of obscure origins from whom the name Ottoman is derived. Osman's early followers consisted both of Turkish tribal groups, like I told you, tribes here and there, and Byzantine renegades. Byzantine renegades were people that were Christians. They lived inside of the Byzantine Empire, but for some reason, they were sick and tired of, Christianity or whatever, with many, but not all converts to Islam. So some of them converted themselves to Islam. Not all of them converted themselves to Islam, but the one thing that they did have in common was that they did not like the Byzantine Empire. Remember, the Byzantine Empire was the Christian empire that came all the way up to Constantinople, right? They called themselves the Byzantines, with many but not all converts. Osman extended the control of his principality by conquering Byzantine towns along the Sakarya River. A Byzantine defeat at the Battle of Bapheus in 1302 contributed to Osman's rise as well. It is now well understood how the early Ottomans came to dominate their neighbors due to the lack of sources surviving from this period of time. And this is very typical of, why it was, when you think about Rome, we went through Rome. And I told you at the beginning that we don't know how Rome came to be. We're not really sure. We know that there are some myths, there's some mythology involved here. There's some myth that, you know, Romulus and Remus, they were nurtured by a she-wolf and all this kind of stuff. But then somebody else said, no, that's not true. It was this woman that came over with the Greeks, and her name was Roma or some kind of crap like that. And that's because it's not like today. Today, after the invention of the printing press, after the invention of paper, after the invention, and then now today, computers, internet, the cloud, the this, the that, the other, we have a much clearer understanding of what happens to us, of what happens to history. But not all of it is that obvious. Not all of it is that obvious. There are a lot of things that we still don't know. There are a lot of things that we still don't understand. And that's the reason why we got college professors, we got academics who are constantly digging, digging through files, digging through, graves, digging into churches, digging into temples, digging into mosques, trying to understand, what the heck was going on. Osman's early followers consisted both of tribal groups. Osman extended the control Byzantine defeat by the Battle of the Third. It is not well understood, how this whole thing happened. The Gaza theory, popular during the 20th century, credited their success to the rallying of religious warriors to fight for them in the name of Islam. And this is what I alluded to you, what I told you about, this is what brought what, in my opinion, now it goes back and forth, because there'll be a bunch of academics that say this is what happened. Sure enough, there'll be another bunch of academics that say, no, that's not really what happened. All of it because nobody wrote it down on a history book. Nobody sat down. And somebody would give an opinion, and then somebody would say something else. But that was one of the big problems. And no consensus on the nature of the early Ottoman states expansion has replaced it. I think that today we are, and I'm in agreement with that. I'm in agreement with that. It was really religious fervor. This guy here, and this is what typically happens with religion. You got one guy that uses religion to gain power. If he can tell people that they're going to go to hell if they don't do something, this is a big motivator. People will do it. They will do what you say. And there's really no difference between Osman and Muhammad, Joseph Smith from the Mormon Church, that woman Lillian White from the Seventh-day Adventist. There really is no difference. I saw God. I wish I was a dishonest guy. I could go around saying I saw God and God told me to do this, and maybe write a book or something like that and make a lot of money and have a lot of power, but I'm not, I'm not dishonest like that. But it just shows a great deal of dishonesty by these people, because they just use religion and they use people's fear of going to hell as a way of motivating them. So again, here is the map. Oh, there it is, Bithynia. Aha, there you go. So Bithynia was right here. And this was the Byzantine Empire. Constantinople was this tip right here. And so there you go. There you have Bithynia. Bithynia, very close to the Black Sea. Way north of the Mediterranean. But anyway, this is Anatolia. This is Bithynia. In the century after the death of Osman I, Ottoman rule began to extend over Anatolia and the Balkans. And the Balkans, right, this area here, right? This would be the Balkans. The earliest conflicts began during the Byzantine-Ottoman Wars, waged in Anatolia in the late 13th century before entering Europe in the mid-14th century, followed by the Bulgarian-Ottoman Wars and the Serbian-Ottoman Wars, waged beginning in the mid-14th century. Much of this period was characterized by Ottoman expansions into the Balkans. Now, the Balkans, Roman Catholics, Christians, and the Ottomans, Muslim, and we got to convert those guys. Osman's son, Orhan, captured the northwestern Anatolian city of Bursa in 1326, making it the new capital of the Ottoman state and supplanting Byzantine control in the region. The important port city of Thessaloniki was captured from the Venetians in 1387 and sacked. Now, imagine that the Venetians were over here by Italy, but the Venetians were seafaring people, and they often crossed over this divide into some of these areas, and they controlled those areas for not religious purposes, but for financial purposes. They were traders mostly. They were business people, aggressive business people, bankers. The Ottoman victory in Kosovo in 1389 effectively marked the end of Serbian power in the region, paving the way for Ottoman expansion into Europe. So once they broke through, and Kosovo is right around here, right there, right in that juncture. Once they broke through that, that was it. They had a clear shot into Europe. The Battle of Nicopolis for the Bulgarian Tsardom, Tsardom from the word Tsar, Tsardom of Vidin in 1396, widely regarded as the last large-scale crusade of the Middle Ages, failed to stop the advance of the victorious Ottoman Turk. And when we talk about, again, when we talk about Charlemagne and the Holy Roman Empire, excuse me, and all of that stuff, we're going to talk about the Crusades. And we're going to talk about the Crusades from the perspective of the Knights Templars, right? And all of the other people that these governments would arm and send to fight back, the Ottomans. They weren't very successful. The Ottomans probably were a little bit more religiously zealous than they were, and they were more afraid of going to hell, and perhaps for that reason they fought harder. As the Turks expanded into the Balkans, the conquest of Constantinople became a crucial objective. So now, they understood they needed to conquer that. The Ottomans had already wrested control of nearly all of former Byzantine lands surrounding the city, but the strong defense of the Constantinople strategic position on the Bosphorus Strait made it difficult to conquer. In 1402, the Byzantines were temporarily relieved when the Turco-Mongol leader Timur, founder of the Timmerid Empire, invaded Ottoman Anatolia from the east in the Battle of Ankara in 1402. Timur defeated the Ottoman forces and took Sultan Bayezid I as a prisoner, throwing the empire into disorder. The ensuing civil war, also known as the Fetret de Vri, lasted from 1402 to 1413 as Bayezid's sons fought over succession. It ended when Mehmed I emerged as the Sultan and restored Ottoman power. The Balkan territories lost by the Ottomans after 1402, including Thessaloniki, Macedonia, and Kosovo, were later recovered by Murad II between the 1430s and 1450s. On the 10th of November 1444, Murad repelled the Crusade of Varna. Now, the word crusade comes from the word cross, right? Cross. And comes from this word right here. And this was the sign that crusaders would place on their breastplates, right here in the middle of their chest. They would have a metal, metal chest piece to protect their chest. And oftentimes they could either paint right on it, or they would have a piece of cloth that would get painted, and then they would tag it onto their chest. And this represented the cross of Christ. So the word crusade, which comes from the cross, like this, not a cross like we know Christ's cross, which is like that, but like this, but it represented the same thing. That's how the word crusade originated. And the word crusade is a military excursion against the Muslims. against the Muslims. Now, that word has evolved over the years to become a an effort, a battle against something, a battle against something. Um, so when Muslims hear the word crusade, they don't like it. They don't like it because memories of the Knights Templars coming over with these big crosses in their chest, with big swords chopping people's heads off, this always, brought them. Give me a second. My cat wants to get in the house. Give me one quick second. We'll continue in half a second. Hold on. Sorry about that. Now he ran away again. Ah, stupid cat. Anyway, so that gives you a little bit of an idea. 4 years later, John Hunyadi prepared another army of Hungarian and Wallachian forces to attack the Turks, but was again defeated at the Second Battle of Kosovo in 1448. The Ottoman they were just very strong, and it was very difficult to push these guys back. It was just very, very difficult to push these guys back. The Pope financed, the kings of Europe financed armies, armies to go down to Israel and liberate Israel, because Israel was, where Christianity was born, and la 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 la. But the bottom line was that it wasn't until the end of the First World War, 600 years later, that the Ottoman Empire managed to break apart. So anyway, so what we're going to do is we're going to leave it here. If you have any questions whatsoever, this is a good time to end of class number 3. This is a good time to say something. Again, keep in mind that I'm going to go into detail on the important aspects, skip over other parts. There's a whole bunch of battles in here that we're going to probably skip. I want to concentrate a little bit more on the tensions, how they continue even still today. That I want to concentrate on, because that tells us, what is really going on, how this empire affected us even today, and then we'll try to make it to the end. I want to give you an idea of some of these guys. The Grand Vizier, which is kind of like second in command, and some of the military defeats. Well, yeah, they had some military defeats. But then I want to concentrate more on right towards the end of First World War, how things began to really fall apart for these guys. Um, how moderation brought upon the decline of the Ottoman Empire to a great degree. And that's because uh, religion tries to keep people the same. They don't like modern thought, modern ideas. They don't like science, because that goes against, everything that they want to preach. So I want to go into a little bit of that, and then we'll sort of call it a day, or we'll call it a class. Um, keep in mind that if you want to read more, read through this. And here's the Armenian genocide. Um, read through this PowerPoint presentation. Um, you can always contact me by email, even after the class is finished. If you want to send me a message, you can send it to Cloud Class. They'll forward it to me. I'll answer you, uh, and I can always give you some reading material. I can answer your questions. However, we have reached the end of the class, and you know what I'm going to say. See you later.
See you later, alligator.
Alligator. Bye.
Bye.